Coming up next, we have got actually somebody who is been added to the schedule, Wilmer Leon, doctor, political scientist. Areas of expertise include Black politics, American government, and public policy. Dr. Leon hosts Inside the Issues on his Sirius XM, channel 126. We are really excited to have you here. Let's give a hand. Dr. Wilmer Leon.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I also co-host the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik with Garland Nixon, who... Thank you. You know, and listening to Ryan reminded me of a comment that Donald Trump made during the campaign, which was he loved debt. He talked about how his empire was based on debt, and that unfortunately too many Americans were too stupid, his words, to understand the power of debt. In fact, I think the adage, well, he didn't use this adage, but one of the adages that was assigned to him was, if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. But if you owe the bank $100 million, you own the bank. Brother Ornande with Uhuru, you know, what he articulated is a very clear example of what Governor DeSantis does not want taught in Florida schools, does not want to see on the AP exam, and I think is a trial balloon for what many conservatives in this country want to do, and that is erase us from American history as a foray or a shot across the bow into erasing us, period. Also, what he mentioned about what happened to the Vanguard basketball court in St. Louis, I think is analogous to what the United States is doing with Haiti and with many other countries. They don't want to see a successful revolution, whether it's something as small and as simple as a basketball court, or whether it is running the French out of your country. I want to talk just a little bit about the power of the narrative, which Garland talked about contrasts. I put it in the context of the power of the narrative. Scott talked about better read than dead. He talked about kill a commie for mommy, and how powerful that narrative was in his ideological development. It was very important and powerful in how he decided to shape and run his life. And it was when he came to understand a different narrative that he then began to understand and develop a different reality. And that, I believe, to a great degree, is what we find ourselves confronted with and what we find ourselves battling every day. I remember, and it's important because he said at the end of his presentation, I'm still conservative. He said, I'm one of the most conservative people you'd ever want to meet. Well, so that means he didn't have to change the core of who he is. He changed elements that were elements and part of his belief system. I remember I interviewed Ray McGovern. I've been interviewing Ray for years. It was about 20 years ago when I first started interviewing Ray McGovern. And we were talking about the war in Iraq. And in talking to him about that, I mentioned Dick Cheney as being a neocon. And Ray stopped me and said, no, Wilmer, no. There is nothing conservative about Dick Cheney. He said, Wilmer, I'm a conservative. And I said, damn, Ray McGovern is a conservative? He said, I'm a conservative. Cheney's a fascist. He dropped an F-bomb. So I just wanted to, in listening to Ray and listening to Ryan and listening to Ornande, those were just some things that popped into my head about what we've heard up to this point. Back to the narrative. I met our leader here in Iran. Caleb, 2016? 2014. I met Caleb in Iran in 2014, and we were invited to a human rights conference to participate in a human rights conference in Tehran. And so when I told friends of mine that I was going to Iran, they said, oh, no, man, you can't go there. You can't go, oh, God, no, you can't go to Iran. Because if you go to Iran, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to kidnap you and cut off your head, or they're going to cut off your head and then kidnap you. So I called the State Department and I said, I've been invited to go to this conference in Iran and I'd like to know if I'm going to have any problems. And so they sent me to the head of the Iran desk for the State Department. And she starts going into this whole thing about, well, you have to understand, we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. We don't have an embassy in Iran. And if something happens to you, if you go missing, there will be no one to call. There will be no U.S. representative for you to call. You're going to have to call the embassy of Switzerland. I said, oh, no, you don't understand my question. I said, I'm not concerned about what the Iranians are going to do to me. What I want to know is, if I go, are you going to let me back in the country? And there was this very long pause. He says, oh, no, you won't have any problem getting back in the country. But see, because what I understood counter to the narrative was, in that culture, if you are their guest, they are obligated to take care of you. They're not going to invite you to their country and then kidnap you and cut off your head. That's just counter to their culture. So again, just an example of narrative. And but to show you the power narrative, I'm sitting in our hotel one morning having breakfast before our session started, and these three men approach my table. And they say, Dr. Leon? I said, yes. Good morning. Thank you. How are you? Fine. We'd like for you to come with us. For what? We'd like to have a meeting with Mr. Bahmani. Now I'm thinking, you guys are here to kidnap me. So I said, well, who's Mr. Bahmani? Mr. Bahmani is the cultural advisor to our supreme leader, and he would like to see you after you finish your breakfast. Have you finished your breakfast? I guess I have. So I get up, and now I'm thinking, these guys are going to kidnap me. The narrative, these guys are going to kidnap me. So as we're walking to the elevator, I said to myself, if they press the down button, I'm running for the door. Because that means there's a white van in the basement. They're going to put a bag over my head and throw me in this van and take me to who knows where. If they press the up button, then I think I'm going to be okay. I'm standing here, they press the up button. Uh, I met with Mr. Bahmani for about 2.5 hours. And the amazing thing was we discussed politics, we discussed black politics, we discussed American history. And about 2 hours into the conversation, I said, sir, with all due respect, I have to ask you this question, and I only know one way to ask it. And he looked at me and he said through the translator, he said, you are my brother. You can ask me any question you deem important. I said, please don't be put off, but I only know one way to ask this question. And he said, what is your question? I said, why do you care? Why do you care so much about our history that you're wanting to have this conversation with me to the detail that we have? And he started laughing and he said, you are my brother. You are oppressed by the very same forces that are oppressing us. That's not for me, that's for Mr. Bahmani. And he said, I'm a Muslim. I'm a Shia Muslim. As such, when we see oppression anywhere in the world, we are obligated to fight that oppressor. If we don't, we become complicit in the oppression. You are my brother, your struggle is our struggle. Counter-narrative. Counter-narrative. Scott Ritter is still a conservative. Ray McGovern is still a conservative. But there is a different narrative. As we talked about on the 29th and the 30th of this month, the Biden administration, they're co-hosting this summit for democracy. And the theme of the summit is progress in the year of action. Now, this so-called summit, in my humble opinion, is eerily reminiscent on the failed summit of some of the Americas that took place in Los Angeles. Was that a year or 2 years ago? If you remember, the president of Mexico, he decided to boycott that summit, and that rendered the work of the administration basically, it made the thing damn near irrelevant. Because with AMLO not showing up, then you also had the presidents of El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. Their absence was incredibly notable. And as with the failed summit of some of the Americas, with this summit for democracy, I think this is analogous to a party. And you can judge the success or the failure of a party by either who's there, but in many instances, you can judge the success or failure of a party by who's not there. And so when we look at this summit for America, you've got Costa Rica, the Netherlands, the Republic of Korea, and the Republic of Zambia. They're the ones that are scheduled to attend this summit they're also, I think, considered to be co-hosts. I have nothing against Zambia. I ain't got nothing against Costa Rica, the Netherlands. But if that's your hit parade, you don't have a hit. Now, Biden, when you go to the State Department website and you read the narrative of this thing, Biden has said, We're currently at the inflection point when it comes to the future of democracy, both within the US and around the world. The defining question of this age, the defining question of this age is whether democracies will continue to deliver for their people in a rapidly changing world. That's Joe Biden. Now, Mr. President, and I know he's watching, Mr. President, that's a very, very, very profound question. Will democracies be able to continue to deliver for their people in a rapidly changing world where countries are facing the existential threat of American imperialism and militarism? He left that part off the question. Will Ukraine be able to deliver post the 2014 Maidan coup, the far right-led revolution in Ukraine? Then President, the democratically elected President Yanukovych, he found himself between a rock and a hard place as he was trying to balance Ukraine's divided politics between a pro-Europe friendly West and a center and a more pro-Russian East. Well, the U.S. sent Victoria Nuland over there with her box of cookies, and the United States overthrew the democratically elected Yanukovych government. Now we are where we are. As Anibal Garzón wrote on April 11th, 2021, to everyone's surprise, an unknown politician, Pedro Castillo, won the first round of the Peruvian presidential election, 18.2% of the vote. He eventually won the general election, and on December 7th, 2022, shortly thereafter, the Peruvian Congress impeached him, arrested him. Deputies accused him of attempting a coup and creating a state of emergency. The U.S. fingerprints were all over that coup that removed him from power. We know about Juan Guaido, former acting president of Venezuela. He was acting because the U.S. refused to recognize the democratically elected, actual, not acting, but actual president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. We're talking about, Garland talked about contradictions. I'm just pointing out some contradictions. These are just a few examples of what Gil Scott-Heron called in Watergate Blues, an endless list that won't be missed when at last America is purged. It's important to look at who has been invited or summoned to appear as clowns in this latest three-ring circus. But as I said, it's also important to look at who's missing. Mexico's not there. I think they're a democracy. Haiti used to be a democracy. Brazil, Venezuela, etc. None of them are coming to this summit. Yes, Mr. President, the defining question of this age is whether democracies will continue to deliver for their people. The answer is yes, if the U.S. gets out of the way and allows them to. If the promotion of democracy is at the top of the Biden administration's list, why is he, Joe Biden, still pursuing the Trump administration's persecution and extradition of Julian Assange? If promotion of democracy is still truly at the top of the Biden agenda, why is diplomat Alex Saab still in a prison in Florida? I just talked about Ukraine and the global South. U.S.-backed military coups were also a regular occurrence in Africa in the decades after independence, and there is still growing concern that they are once again starting to become more frequent. There were 2 U.S.-backed coups in Burkina Faso in 2022, as well as failed coup attempts in Guinea-Bissau. The Gambia and the island nation of Sao Tome and Principe. In 2021, there were 6 coup attempts on the continent. 4 of them were successful. A senior African national official has expressed concern about the resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government. Is there a statistically significant correlation between the rise in power of AFRICOM and the number of coups on the continent of Africa? I think the answer to that question would be yes. Mr. President, you are correct. The defining question of the age is whether democracies will continue to deliver for their people, again, if the United States gets out of the way. As we look at the meeting between President Xi and President Putin this past week, we find ourselves in the midst of a shift away from a unipolar to a multipolar system. As we look at the deal brokered between China and Iran and the Saudis, as we look at the flurry of change that is resulting from that deal, there is truly a new world order. Remember that phrase from the 1990s? It was widely used on the political scene as it had been coined by then President George H.W. Bush. Well, America, be careful what you wish for, be careful what you pray for. The new world order is on the horizon. It's not the shining city on the hill. It's called multipolarity. And we will get there if the ignorance and the arrogance and the racism and the myopic view in the politics of the world by the likes of Biden and Blinken and Samantha Power and Victoria Nuland et al. Don't blow the world up before we do. Thank you.